The time has come. It's been delayed long enough for plenty of reasons, and now it's time to talk about it. It's time to school all of you nerds who want to sit here and tell me that bards are the worst, that bards are bad, that they suck, that they're a mistake, that they should be eliminated, and I'm about to explain to all of you exactly why you are completely incorrect. I watched your little video, your little podcast, your little nitpicky bullshit about why the bard shouldn't exist in D&D. I've seen all the arguments, I've heard all of your pointers, and now it's time for them to be destroyed right in front of your eyeballs. I hope you're ready for this. Now I've taken some notes from the video because I didn't feel like doing that much editing. The first point that was brought up and that I want to dispute right off the bat is that the bard is one of the, quote, many things in D&D 5e that kills class niche. He says that there is not a situation that a bard can't help out in, that they could do anything and therefore they're also nothing. Basically that a bard can step on the toes of just about any other established class. That if you level it just so, that a bard is going to be able to outshine a wizard at wizarding, at doing those kind of spells, or outshine a thief that has thief skills, because a bard can learn those exact same things and possibly even be better at it. And while I can understand the argument that it's kind of bullshit, that there's a class that can outclass the other classes, and that it's not its own special thing, but it's a master of all things. But, and this is a very important but, do you like big butts? The bard is not going to be the master of all the things in one campaign. It's just not. Especially if you multi-class, and I don't really want to get into the whole multi-classing thing because it would get us off on a tangent that doesn't really matter as far as what I'm talking about right now. But the thing about it is that, yes, the bard has the potential to be the master of all these different kinds of things, but it's never going to be all of those things at the same time, even if you multi-class, because that's not the way that leveling up works. And I know I'm the last person in the entire goddamn universe that needs to be talking about how exactly the technical side of D&D works. I am just a fish struggling to breathe oxygen underwater. But I've played a bard enough times to know for a fact that you are not leveling them up to outshine anyone else and outshine yet another person. Basically what I'm getting at is that you could, in theory, have a wizard character in your game who is a spellcaster, and you could have a bard in your game that is also a spellcaster. And in theory, on paper, technically speaking, you could have a bard character that outshines the wizard at its own niche. But a player that's worth anything is not going to do that. That's not what the bard was intended for. It's not there so that a player can outshine another player at what their character was intended for. A good bard character is going to mold itself into whatever the party needs, whatever it happens to need in that time. Because at the end of the day, a person is typically not going to play a bard because they want to be a skill master, because the bard wasn't designed to be a master of any skill. They were designed to be able to be compatible with whatever situation is presented to them. And that can also be applied to just the role-playing side of things. A charming person or a person with a lot of charisma is going to be able to read a room and understand how to interact with people to get the result that they want. Just likewise, a good player playing a bard is going to understand how to mold themselves into the grooves that are being created by what their party needs at any given time. So it's one thing to say and gripe about the fact that, yeah, you could have a thief character that's getting totally out-thiefed by a bard character that decided to be a better thief than the thief. But unless you just have a really crappy player at your table playing a bard, that's extremely unlikely to happen. That's going to come down to player choice, and it doesn't make the bard as a class a bad thing. There's the argument that they can get expertise and overshadow others and step on their toes. I'm not extremely familiar with how expertise works, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't really negate my original point that as long as you have a player that knows what they're doing, that's not going to happen. Because, again, a player playing a bard is very unlikely to be playing it to be the strongest of the strong, because that's not where the bard strong suit actually comes in. A good player playing a bard character class is going to create that bard to be whatever the party needs it to be. And the way that the system is designed, they're able to put their level up skill points into places where the party is lacking. So, they may not be the hardest hitter in spellcasting, but they could be if you don't have a party with a wizard in it. Do you feel me? Now, Aaron basically makes the argument that being overpowered is bad, and I don't disagree with that at all. I could concede that there are some problems with having the bard being overpowered, but again, it's extremely unlikely to happen, not only because you don't want to step on other players' toes, but because it would take so much leveling to get a bard to that point. Even if you take into consideration things like multiclassing, having done that many times myself, I have multiclassed a few bards in my day. Usually I like the bard sorcerer combo, but even then, they're not the hardest hitter. And I know that there are those who say that that doesn't matter, but it does. Aaron did make one point where he said, you want something skillful done, you've got a thief to do that. So why would you have it to where the bard could learn the thief's skills? But what happens when you don't have a thief in your party? Good thing you had that bard there that realized that there wasn't a thief and therefore leveled themselves up to have thief skills. Yeah? Their greatest strength is going to come down to being a face character. And for tables that don't really do a whole lot of active roleplay or speaking in character, this might not be something even worth considering. But for a lot of us, that is something that we partake in a lot. And so having someone at the table that's willing to take on that role of being the face, the interactor with NPCs, etc., that's not nothing. And that's where the bard's really going to shine. I can't tell you how many situations I've been in at tables where there were more players that were more introverted and more shy about speaking in character, where a bard really came in handy. And it wasn't that the bard itself made that position easier exactly, just that it makes sense within the context of a group, that's the one that's going to be the face. The next point I wanted to talk about is the whole thing as far as using instruments as a focus. I heard a lot of talk about how using the instrument as the focus is dumb. What? So Aaron talked about how the book says that they can use their instrument as a focus, but the word can implicates that they don't have to. They don't have to sing or play the instrument, that they can just wave it around like a wand and, make magic happen. I personally can't understand the problem with this, because waving around an instrument or, I don't know, a guitar is not any stupider than waving around a stick that's a magic wand, because that's essentially all that it is. And it's also no dumber than, a sorcerer having a necklace here that they have to physically touch in order to cast spells. It's the same thing. It's all going to come down to that flavor and theater of the mind. And it doesn't inherently make the bard a bad class just because you don't like the aesthetic. And that's something I'm going to talk a lot about in the next point. But basically, this is kind of an argument stating that because you think that it looks stupid in your head, that makes it bad. It's not. The reason that they word it that way is because they probably realize that saying that you can't just wave your instrument around and make magic happen is kind of dumb, comparatively speaking, when you have other focuses that cast spells, or that you focus on to cast spells that are inanimate. And so, while personally I think it's really cool to play the instrument or sing or write the spell or whatever it has to be in order to make magic happen, that's kind of cool. And it works. It works for the purposes of what we're doing here. And so, yeah, it doesn't make the class bad. I say that it all comes down to flavor and taste and theater of the mind. But just because it doesn't appeal to your palate of what you want your aesthetic to be doesn't make it inherently bad. Next, I heard the argument that it's cheesy for a bard to play music and for people to get inspired, particularly on the battlefield or in the middle of a trap-filled dungeon. However, for all of the things that a bard can't specialize in because they're sort of a jack of all trades, this is something that the bard specializes in and can do that the other classes can't. And I hate to use the word can't because it's such a strong word, because I guess technically you could, but I mean, you could technically have any of the classes do anything by that logic. The point is that this is something that the bard shines in. This is where their particular brand of existing comes into play here. The bard is the badass that's going to inspire everybody by being as flashy and inspiring and uplifting and motivating as they can be while the blood is spewing and the battle is raging. They can be flashy if they have to while slashing their blade or singing their goddamn song. Whatever it has to be, they're the cheerleader. They're the ringleader, the motivator, the one shouting out the battle cry and getting everybody doing their fucking best. They are William Wallace giving the speech in Braveheart. They are Patrick Star in Fishnet Stockings. They are Dwight Schrute banging their hands on the podium and getting everybody fired up to do their best. And when you think of it that way, it's not nonsensical. I see you guys out there trying to act like it just doesn't make sense or that it doesn't fit the flavor. And I can't get that. Whether they're the fool or the hero really just kind of depends on the way you look at it. And of course it depends on how the player is playing them. So this also comes back to the whole, it doesn't fit my aesthetic. It's stupid in relation to everything else going on. And like everything else, goddamn like everything else, it all comes down to how you can expand your own imagination to make it work. You need to be able to think outside of the box in a game like D&D. In my personal opinion, and I don't think my opinion is wrong, it's like saying you think that D&D games with high magic settings are dumb. And therefore, a wizard in such a world wouldn't make sense. And therefore is bad. It's not that the wizard would be bad in a setting that doesn't have high magic. It's that you aren't able to make it work. It's that you are not allowing yourself to think out of the box enough to make that happen, or it's an unwillingness to do so. But no matter which way you lean as far as that goes, it doesn't make it a fact that the class is bad. The wizard is not a bad class. It's just not fitting the flavor of that world that you constructed. And looping back for a quick second about the how the bard can step on the wizard's toes, a bard can be anything, but it can't be everything at once. And a good player is going to make sure that that doesn't happen. Therefore, the fact that it could happen doesn't make the class bad. It comes down to the player. I have a feeling this next point is going to really irritate some of you, so I'm going to keep it brief. The lore of where the magic comes from. I'll be honest with you, in terms of the D&D universe, no matter which edition we're talking about, I know pretty much nothing about that. From what I gathered in your conversation, it has to come from like the weave, but I'll get back to that. When it comes to the lore of where the magic comes from, apparently there's some dissonance as far as where bards get their magic. And to that, I have to say, well, are you going by the book or are you going by your own imagination? Because the magic could come from wherever your creative brain could come up with it coming from. There are all kinds of ways that you could come up with that a magic could be inborn in someone or bestowed upon someone. There's really no limit to your own imagination unless you're imposing those limits on yourself. So I took a note here that says they manipulate the weave through their artistic expression, which I think sounds pretty cool. But they leave a logical gap. What is the logic? It's magic. And this is why I'm saying I know I'm going to probably piss some of you off because I just don't personally know very much about like the D&D lore as far as where magic comes from with each class. So that's not something I really feel adequate to speak on. I took a few more notes here, using calligraphy to cast spells, to which I said, why not? That's cool. It's great because it can be anything within the reasonable constraints of the rules of combat, which really is, at the end of the day, is what makes this a game and not just like role-play storytelling. As far as how the bard is going to cast spells, whether it's by a focus or by waving their instrument or by singing, whatever it is, as long as it's within reasonable constraints of the rules of combat for D&D, which is essentially what makes it a game, it doesn't really matter. And if you say, well, but it looks dumb in my head, okay, so that's something that you can kind of work with at the table and see if, you just don't want to include the bard class then. But it doesn't make the class bad just because your own imagination isn't cutting it. Just because you can't make it work in your mind's eye. I'm also just going to briefly touch on the history of where the bard comes from. So greater historical context, it can help if that helps you, but it's not especially relevant. What I will say is it does help if knowing how they fit better in the traditional sense of the traditional typical D&D verse, if knowing that helps you, great, but it's not essential. And in a funny way, it's also kind of helping prove my point. For the ones that want to say they don't fit, they don't make sense. Yeah, they do. There's the whole historical stuff. So there was talk about how the bard was the story keeper, the tale keeper, the one keeping the histories, and doing that and the performing that it kind of started to lean into later are not mutually exclusive. That's the way that tales were passed on, and that's the way that we still, in a sense, pass on stories and lessons and histories today. Performing and the arts and music is the way that we've used to convey these things for hundreds of years in the real world. I don't know about the D&D verse, but from what I heard, that's also a thing. So it's not nonsensical for that to have translated into a performer class. And I actually think it's pretty cool. Someone mentioned the problem is that there are more performers than historians. Not necessarily. They can be flavored however you want. Again, that's going to come down to player. And I feel like a lot of this is going to come down to how the player is going to play the bard, less about how they're written. There's a lot of complaint here that just seems to be more or less the rules don't make it definitive and clear what the bard is supposed to be. But I see that more as an asset than a problem. Because kind of what I was saying in the beginning, it just means that the bard can fit into whatever space is needed by the party. It doesn't have to step on any toes as long as the player knows what they're doing. Now, the whole thing about the bard being kind of generally overpowered, I don't have enough technical knowledge to know if that's true. From what I heard in the podcast and Aaron's video, it sounds true. And that sucks. I'll give you that, but it's tweakable. It's work withable. And, I can understand the argument like, well, if you have to go out of your way to tweak it for your game, that it kind of sucks. Yeah, but that's just kind of a little thing, I guess. That could be better. I'll concede it. But it doesn't make the entire class just garbage. And also, as far as just being more talented at something that someone else has worked their whole life for, on paper, I can kind of see how that would be irritating. But that also just kind of happens in real life. There are people who have natural talents for things, even if they didn't work their whole life to achieve that goal. That's just kind of how it is. Life isn't fair and it kind of sucks. I just don't see it as a compelling reason to hate the class as a whole. Basically, the player, if it's a good player playing a bard, is going to go out of their way to accommodate the party, because that's what it's for. It's made to fill the void of whatever is needed in a party that might need whatever. And the point then of being the bard and not just being that thing that the bard is taking the place of has a lot to do with just the way you want to play it. The charisma comes in handy, and that's really the point. The point is the charisma and the ability to be the face character, to be the one having conversations with NPCs. And that doesn't mean that the bard always has to fill that position. It's not like everybody else at the table is going to be silent while the bard handles all conversation. That's not how it goes. But having someone in your party that is really adept at persuasion and getting out of jams and one that's your cheerleader and motivating you when things look down and bleak, that's not nothing. That has value. And that's pretty much all I have to say on it. I hope that you feel thoroughly educated now. You're welcome. I'm sorry this took so long. My first recording just went to crap because the audio didn't record. So, yeah, sorry it's late. If you want to see any more from me, please subscribe. I'm sure that I'll get baited into doing more D&D related videos. Also subscribe to Aaron the Pedantic, though let's be real, if you're here watching this, you already are, and that's why you're here. Again, I'm sure that he'll bait me into making more response videos, so please subscribe if you want to see more from me. In summation, bards are good, actually. I stand by it, and now you know why. Thank you for watching. I'll make another video soon. Bye!